Hello everyone, please press subscribe, press follow, press the bell so you don't miss any new clips. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Author by Flying Alone. Audio novels by Novelist. Chapter 196, Pain Compensation. Ling Han and Xuanhuan both wreaked great havoc. With a punch and a kick, the mayhem began, starting from the main doors onwards. Whatever they saw, they destroyed, creating a path of ruin and destruction towards the main hall, leaving wreckage and damage behind them. Of course, there were even more members of the Earth and Water faction who had jumped out to stop them, but Ling Han had hired as many as 100 gushing tier martial artists, and now was the time to make use of them. They too jumped out and blocked the incoming attacks, ensuring Ling Han's safety. When Ling Han led his path of destruction all the way to the main hall, what was originally a beautiful garden and an elegant corridor was already in complete disorder. Ruined flowers were here and there, broken pieces of the pillars were all over the floor, it was as if there was a demolition project going on in this place. "Stop it!" A mighty voice was heard, and a tall, old man appeared. There was an endless frosty and powerful aura exuding from his whole body, filled with the forceful air of a person who had occupied a high social rank for a long time. It was the faction leader of the Earth and Water faction, whose cultivation level was in the 5th layer of spiritual ocean tier. Everyone could not help but stop moving. The reputation of a person was like the shadow cast by a tree. No matter what, Yang Qiandu was still the leader of a faction, and so naturally had his own influence. However, it seems that his influence and reputation had no obvious effect on the demolishing duo. Quang, Peng, Guang. Ling Han and Xuanhuan were very much enjoying the process of spreading damage, and there were even more things that could be broken in the main hall, such as tables, chairs, vases, screens, and so on. Especially in Xuanhuan's case. She had been raised by a ferocious beast in the first place, so there was a thirst for blood and destruction flowing in her veins. This nature had only been temporarily repressed at Ling Han's side, and was now being slowly set free. She bared her little canines, fully displaying her fierce nature, as if she herself was a little tiger. "I told you to stop!" Yang Qiandu shouted in fury. His voice became a ripple that swept out towards Ling Han and Xuanhuan. Xuanhuan's figure twisted and dodged, as if she could teleport, and actually managed to dodge the sound wave created by this shout miraculously. Meanwhile, Ling Han's left hand moved, and the blood-sucking origin gold transformed into a concave mirror. The power of the sound wave collected in front of it and was reflected back in a straight line. With a poo, it actually crushed the legs of a nearby member of the Earth and Water faction into a foam of blood. Ling Han withdrew the origin gold, shook his head and said, "Leader Yang is indeed unrivaled in your power. Merely one shout and you can actually liquefy the flesh and blood of a human being. You truly deserve the name of an elite in spiritual ocean tier. However, why had you attacked your own people? Could it be he cuckolded you?" Even if Yang Qiandu was a subtle person by nature, he could not help but turn green after hearing such words. He said coldly, "Brat, a loose tongue may cause a lot of trouble. You're definitely going to die today." He suddenly moved, moving as fast as a lightning bolt. With a single leap, he was right in front of Ling Han, and stretched out his hand in a strike. "Get lost!" Xuanhuan moved, becoming a golden Buddha. He struck out with a palm strike, and golden light filled the air. Peng! The two elites clashed head-on for a single strike, and both of them were slightly trembling from the force. Then they each took 7 steps back. However, Xuanhuan's expression changed slightly, and he took another step back and finally managed to steady his footing. This was because he suffered from an ailment. If not, he would definitely not have been at a disadvantage in this clash. "Shatter a mountain with 7 punches, Xuanhuan." With one glance, Yang Qiandu recognized his opponent. "Sword of rioting shadows, Yang Qiandu," Xuanhuan said calmly. Yang Qiandu could not help but become cautious. Xuanhuan was also in the 5th layer of spiritual ocean tier. Though the latter had been at a slight disadvantage in that clash of blows just now, if there was another person who joined forces with him, that would be enough to oppose him. Ling Han had in total 7 spiritual ocean tier elites on his side, while he only had 3 on his side. In terms of numbers, he was at too much of a disadvantage. Brother Xuanhuan, why do you need to involve yourself with this nasty business? Why don't you choose to stand by and do nothing, and in return, I shall owe you a debt. Agreed. Yang Qiandu decided to restrain his displeasure for the moment. Xuanhuan laughed disdainfully, and said, is the great leader Yang not aware of the grand reputation of the Earth and Water faction? I dare not accept a debt from you. Yang Qiandu was so angry he was shaking. This was completely ridiculing him. However, Xuanhuan's words took a swift turn. We are only hired to protect young Master Han. As long as young Master Han is unharmed, we would of course not make a move. Thus, why won't the great leader Yang give us all some face and let Ling Han take a walk around here and go for a look around, and we can just enjoy some tea and chat in the meanwhile. How about it? How about it, your sister? All the members of the Earth and Water faction looked like they wanted to commit murder. This walk of Ling Han was not the slightest bit peaceful. From the moment he had entered, he had started his path of destruction, and was even worse than a gang of bandits suddenly set upon him. If they allowed him to walk around for a while, then would there be an undamaged tile left in the headquarters of the Earth and Water faction? Yang Qiandu's eyes swept over the group, and his eyes suddenly lit up. He asked, everyone, you only need to ensure the safety of this young man, right? Naturally. Xuanhuan and the others nodded. Then this young girl and the little girl should not be included in your protection, right? A cold smirk curled around the corners of Yang Qiandu's lips. He was talking about Lu Yutong and Hu Niu. Indeed, no. Xuanhuan and the others shook their heads. Good. Yang Qiandu gave a wave of his hand, pointed at Lu Yutong and Hu Niu, and commanded, apprehend the 2 of them. He calmed down and lifted his teacup for a sip, feeling that everything was back under his control. Yes. Faction leader. The members of the Earth and Water faction all got the wind back into their sails. They had finally found a weakness, and could finally turn the tables and get back into control. Ling Han laughed, and said, allow me to introduce. This beautiful young miss has the surname of Lu, and the given name of Yutong. She is the princess of the Lu clan of the 8 great clans. Hee. I am really impressed, great leader Yang. You are indeed very brave to actually dare to make a move on even the young miss of the Lu clan. Awesome. There would definitely be no one else with such overwhelming courage like you. Pooh. Yang Qiandu instantly spat out a mouthful of hot tea. How could Lu Yue, who had been beside him, foreseen such a sneak attack? As a result, his whole face was covered with tea. His eyebrows, hair, and beard were all stuck onto his face. Stop. Yang Qiandu did not have the time to comfort Lu Yue and hurriedly shouted at his underlings to stop. If they actually dared to come to blows with the princess of the Lu clan, then most likely, the powerful elites of the Lu clan would soon come over and turn the whole Earth and Water faction upside down. It is indeed the young miss of the Lu clan. I've seen her once before. She's one of the twin pearls of the imperial city. Who would not have heard of her? She is indeed shockingly beautiful. Why would she be with such a detestable brat? The people of the Earth and Water faction mumbled amongst themselves. Even the princess of the Lu clan was involved. They seemed to smell a scent of danger. Could it be that the Lu clan was displeased with them, and had deliberately sent Ling Han over to give him a little punishment? Don't misunderstand. Ling Han smiled slightly, and took the initiative to explain. This has nothing to do with the Lu clan. The reason I came today is actually very simple. Last night, you guys crashed my Yutong. How many of our stores have been crashed? 47. Lu Yutong instantly answered. You guys crashed 47 of my stores, so I have come today to get some justice. Ling Han grinned. How much do you intend to pay to compensate for my loss? Fuck, you came to make damage and destruction at the Earth and Water faction, and actually want us to give you an explanation. The people of the Earth and Water faction were all furious at this. They usually bullied the commoners and acted tyrannical on the streets, doing all kinds of bad deeds. They could be considered quite shameless people themselves, but now they realized that compared with Ling Han's shamelessness, they paled in comparison. You came to make trouble at our faction, and still want our faction to pay you compensation. Yang Tiandu was so extremely furious that he laughed, his tone cold and dark. Not paying. Ling Han grinned. Then I'll just continue to spread destruction. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 197, Reporting to the Authorities. Quang, quang, quang. Ling Han moved and mercilessly went back to his path of destruction. Hu Niu had already returned to Ling Han's side, to avoid being ambushed by the Earth and Water faction. If she were captured and held hostage, then Ling Han would still be slightly troubled. Stop. The men of Earth and Water faction once again tried to stop him. But one move from him, and Xuanhuan and his group would move as well, creating a domino effect and once again inciting the start of a battle royal. Please do not make things difficult for us, fellows, Xuanhuan and his group said. Fuck. There were already some men of the Earth and Water faction who had spat out blood in their overwhelming rage. It was this brat who had first come to their place to make trouble, but why were they the ones being advised not to make a move and create trouble for him? Was there any such logic in this world? Whatever Ling Han saw, he would smash. Hu Niu had transformed into a creature of violence and destroyed the furniture and ornaments in the place, reducing him to an indescribable state. Though there were only two of them, one adult and one child, but how could the destructive power of gushing spring tear be taken lightly? This vase is not bad. Ling Han picked up a vase, and with a quang, it had shattered into 100 pieces. He shrugged, and said, "Ayo, my hand slipped." Quang. And another delicate vase was shattered. My hand slipped again. Quang. Why is my hand so slippery today? Great leader Yang, whenever you have made the decision to compensate me, you can come over and discuss it with me. Ling Han said with a smile as he smashed a painting that had been hanging on the wall of the main hall into pieces, causing Hu Niu to clap her hands in delight. Because the painting depicted a fierce tiger with white eyes that had been hung up. It had obviously offended the little girl. Yang Tiandu's face was dark and cold. After gritting his teeth for a moment, he said, "Make a report to the Imperial Guards. Tell them that someone has trespassed into our residence illegally and is committing a crime here." Leader. The members of the Earth and Water faction all exclaimed in shock. If they actually reported this to the Imperial Guards, then what would be left of their reputation? They were a great faction, and were actually forced by a young man to the extent that they had to get the Imperial Guards to solve the issue. If this news spread out, then what pride would they have left? Do you think that it'll help our pride to have this kind of situation continue? Yang Tiandu humphed. The rest all immediately fell silent. That's right. Ling Han was currently very much enjoying his destruction and devastation, yet they could only stand by and watch helplessly. If the situation continued, was this anything to be proud of? I'll go. Lu Yue gritted his teeth and accepted this mission. He really could not bear to just stand by and watch helplessly as Ling Han continued on his path of devastation, so he might as well leave. What the eye doesn't see, the heart doesn't grieve over. Then it's up to you, Elder Lu, Yang Tiandu said. Lu Yue left. Now that they were at this level, the people of the Earth and Water faction decided they might as well get over it, and simply wait for the Imperial Guards to deal with Ling Han. One had to know that the Empire had its own laws. Publicly destroying the private residence of another was also quite a serious crime. After only about half an hour, Lu Yue returned with a troop of several dozen Imperial Guards. Though they were not a large number, and the one walking in the lead was only in gushing spring tear, their identity as Imperial Guards was still there. Would Xuanhuan and his group still dare to go against these Imperial Guards? If they dared to make a move, that would mean becoming an enemy of the Empire, and that equated to a major offense of treason. The men of the Earth and Water faction had never been so desperate to see the Imperial Guards until this moment. Their eyes had turned red in their excitement and they went up to receive them. Their greetings and reception were so warm that the Imperial Guards experienced a bit of a shock. These guys were smiling in a way that was a bit scary. We're all men here. Why are you grabbing onto my hand, and still not letting go? Could it be that you're interested in me? Captain Zhao. Yang Qiandu greeted the minor captain of the Imperial Guards, and said, "There is a madman creating great damage in this place of mine, and disregards the laws of the Empire entirely. Please arrest him, and punish him severely according to the laws." Captain Zhao looked strangely at him, and asked, "With your ability, you are still unable to apprehend this madman, Master Yang?" The members of the Earth and Water faction all flushed, while Yang Qiandu simply said composedly, "We are all good citizens who obey the laws, so how could we so easily resort to force?" Our first reaction was naturally to make a report to Captain Zhao, and get the Imperial Guards to arrest the criminal. This is the natural course of events, and abides by the laws of our nation. TSK, TSK, TSK. How nice these words sound. Captain Zhuo's face twitched violently. He was naturally aware of the kind of characters that were in the Earth and Water faction. When he heard Yang Qiandu call himself a good citizen, he suddenly felt an urge to throw up. Thankfully, he managed to repress this urge. Otherwise, if he had really thrown up over Yang Qiandu, then it would not be easily explained even if he were a minor captain of the Imperial Guards. Ha ha ha. Leader Yang's tolerance is really impressive, making me think of an animal called the tortoise. Xuanhuan laughed loudly. If Leader Yang returns home one day and sees a lecherous criminal trying to do that to your beautiful little concubine, would Leader Yang still abide by the laws of the Empire, and first make a report to the Imperial Guards? Naturally. One of the other lone cultivators laughed as well. But is it really good to be cuckolded like this? Who knows, perhaps Master Yang has never had any children all these years, and so would bear being cuckolded just to become a happy father. Ha 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 ha. The rest of the lone cultivators did not hold much respect for anyone in the first place, so they too joined in on the raucous laughter. Yang Qiandu was so enraged he was shaking. However, he only pretended he had not heard anything, and said, "Captain Zhao, please uphold justice." All right. Captain Zhao agreed. This was part of his duties. Where is the madman? There. Yang Qiandu pointed at a place where smoke and dust was wafting out from. Obviously, Ling Han was currently creating damage there. Captain Zhao waved his hand, and brought his men over. After a moment, he finally spotted Ling Han and Hu Niu, who were in the midst of their fun and delighting in their destruction. Instantly, his heart trembled. He had seen Ling Han's portrait before. That was when a strict command had come from his superiors. As long as Ling Han did not do something atrocious like committing murder, then no matter what other things he did, the Imperial Guards were to turn a blind eye to it, and if he encountered any danger, they were to even help him out. Captain Zhao, please act quickly. To avoid a greater loss, Yang Qiandu said from the side, for there was suddenly no movement from Captain Zhao. Captain Zhao gave a sigh, shook his head, and said, "I don't have the ability to deal with this issue." What? Yang Qiandu had a sudden urge to go on a rampage. Not even the Imperial Guards were able to deal with this. Are you messing around with me? Master Yang, you're on your own. Captain Zhao revealed a meaningful smile. Additionally, let me give Master Yang a word of warning. You must definitely not injure this person. Otherwise, I would have no choice but to arrest you. Fuck. Yang Qiandu was currently feeling very depressed. He invited the Imperial Guards over to help him out, but now they were actually all on the other side. How could he endure this? Captain Zhao did not say anything else. With a wave of his hand, the several dozen men all stood at one side, as if they were there to keep Yang Qiandu under surveillance. All of a sudden, the members of the Earth and Water faction cursed Captain Zhao and all his ancestors. How could they be bullied to this extent? Peng, peng, peng. On the other side, Ling Han and Hu Niu were still causing great damage and destruction, and from the looks of it, they would not desist unless the whole Earth and Water faction was destroyed. Yang Qiandu sighed, closed his eyes, and curled his hands into fists. Because he had used too much strength, his hands were slightly trembling. After a moment, he snapped open his eyes, and said, "Young Master Han, let us come and discuss the matter of compensation." He decided to yield. There was no other way. If it was a clash of power, Ling Han had 7 spiritual ocean tier elites and 100 gushing spring tier martial artists behind him, which was enough to dominate the earth and water faction. If they went the official route, Ling Han was even more awesome. The Imperial Guards not only did not deal with the issue, but would also step up to protect him. What else could he do then? Ha 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 ha. Xuanhuan and his group laughed loudly. Leader Yang's divine art of the tortoise is indeed practiced to the point of perfection. You can really pull back so smoothly and so easily. I'm impressed. I definitely wouldn't be able to learn this art. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 198. Agree to compensate. Faced with these mockeries and ridicules, Earth and Water factions members could only silently endure all kinds of insults, letting people slap their face. Ling Han stopped, looked at Yang Qiandu, and laughed. Leader Yang, how do you plan to compensate me? Yang Qiandu's teeth crackled, but circumstances prevail over men, so he said solemnly, 100,000 silvers. As he said the words, he only felt a burn on his face, as if someone slapped him fiercely. He was the master of a faction and a formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator, who would have thought he'd lower his head to an element gathering tier youngster. This was a great humiliation. Ling Han laughed aloud, then said, Leader Yang, are you dismissing a beggar? Based on Earth and Water factions' affluence and power, you ought to pay several million silvers, right? Bullcrap. Yang Qiandu almost threw a fit. Several million silvers, why don't you go rob that? Earth and Water faction was equivalent to a middle-class clan, and because they were willing to do dirty work, their income was certainly more than that of a middle-class clan. Ling Han quoted several millions right off the bat. How could he not be agitated? Even if the entire Earth and Water faction was sold, he wouldn't be able to get that sum of money. Impossible, he said definitively. Honestly, 100,000 silvers already hurt his heart. If there wasn't another way, how could he submit? Ling Han laid out his hands, and said, anyways, I've plenty of time to sit here and drink tea, watch a show, and wait for Leader Yang to change your mind. Bam bam bam. Who knew was still causing mass destruction? The little girl was a human-shaped monster. Despite ramming into walls, which fell one after another, she remained unscathed, laughing and enjoying herself greatly. If it was before, Yang Qiandu might have taken down who knew, but having seen the Imperial Guard's attitude, he knew that Ling Han had an incredibly scary background. This time, he could only swallow the insult bitterly. He waved people over, and after understanding the details of the situation, he said, Young Master Han, this faction knows not which stores belong to you. One who does not know is not guilty. We are willing to fully compensate, so please, young Master Han, have the generosity to let this go. As for the matter of Earth and Water faction being trashed, he naturally did not bring it up and just accepted it as a lesson for provoking someone he shouldn't. Of course, he could still get Cheng Yunzhang to pay. Cheng family caused this trouble to begin with. Earth and Water faction's disciples all revealed embarrassed and angry expressions, but dared not speak due to Ling Han's influence. They only felt that it was the most shameful day of their lives. Ling Han swept them with a glance, and said, You guys refuse to accept it. Why were you guys so insensible yesterday then, to have started trouble at my property? But, Leader Yang is willing to compromise, so I'll give you a chance. Pay 100,000 silvers first, then tear down Chen family's stores every day. Yang Qiandu looked at Captain Zhao and said, We are fine subjects that respect justice and abide by the law. Don't start this nonsense. Ling Han resolutely shook his hands in admonition, and said, I don't mind staying here for a while longer. Looking at Yang Qiandu suffer humiliation, Earth and Water faction's disciples felt miserable and angry, wishing to run right up to tear Ling Han to pieces. However, seeing the Imperial Guards that were running him down with unfriendly gazes, they had to abandon their intentions. Good. Yang Qiandu was unexpectedly straightforward, coming to a resolution quickly and gritting his teeth in agreement. He waved his hand, and very quickly a man came carrying an embroidered box. After receiving it, he threw it to Ling Han. Ling Han opened it to see 10 silver notes lying inside, each of 10,000 denomination. He smiled slightly, walked in front of Captain Zhao, handed over the silver notes, and said, "Captain Zhao, this is a small token of appreciation for the trouble in coming over. Eat sumptuously afterwards." Hiss. This guy was a bit too generous. That was 100,000 silvers, not 10 pieces of toilet paper. Captain Zhao promptly declined, and said, "No need, no need. Protecting the citizens' safety is our obligation as Imperial Guards." Hearing those words made Earth and Water factions' disciples want to beat someone. Why didn't you say anything when Ling Han acted violently? How extremely partial. Take it. I can't let you brothers come for nothing. Ling Han shoved the silver notes to him. For him, 100,000 silvers was like a drizzle. Besides, this was Earth and Water factions' tainted money, which he didn't want to touch at all. Only then did Captain Zhao put away the silver notes, filled with gratitude towards Ling Han. Even though he couldn't take all 100,000 for himself as he'd have to hand over the majority upwards when he returned, he could still get 10,000 or so, a decent amount of easy money. Yang Tiandu's face twitched. That was his money, but it was used by Ling Han to pretend to be generous, and yet he didn't even receive a thank you. "Young Master Han, you're satisfied now, right?" He had to endure the extreme humiliation, the veins on his forehead popping out. He. Ling Han laughed lightly, and said, "I suppose so. Leader Yang, don't forget my earlier demands. If I see any of Chen family's stores still open, then I'll take these friends here for some tea. I definitely won't let young Master Han down." Yang Tiandu grumbled, almost to the point of roaring. "Now, you can let that little girl stop." He pointed at who knew. Ling Han had stopped, but the little girl didn't, and she was still knocking down wall after wall. After a wall got knocked down, she would laugh endearingly like it was very fun. Ling Han laughed aloud, and said, "New, time to go home. I still want to play." The little girl showed that she was not yet content. "Let's go eat meat." Ling Han tempted. Meat. Who knew immediately hopped on and hung on Ling Han like a monkey. "Everyone, we'll meet again as long as time stands." Ling Han walked off swaggeringly. Xuanhuan and the rest followed him. Naturally, the Imperial Guards retreated right after, leaving Earth and Water factions people too pained for even tears as they beheld the scene of desolation in their headquarters. Ling Han first went to Heavenly Martial Palace to update the request as finished, so that the masses could receive their pay. "Young Master Han, thank you. If you have assignments like this hereafter, remember to call us brothers." The people talked to him one after another. It was just a fight without any risks and they earned 10,000. This assignment was definitely good. The assignments they accepted previously, like going to a robber's den to kill someone, were filled with danger, which could easily get them killed. They were basically using their lives to make money. The several formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivators all made an exception and smiled at Ling Han. A financial backer like Ling Han was someone even they wanted to be on friendly terms with, but they were embarrassed to express it too overtly due to their status of martial artists in spiritual ocean tier. Everyone dispersed, but Xuanhuan stayed behind as he still had to consult Ling Han about the problems with his cultivation. "Tell me, what do you want me to do?" Xuanhuan said. Although he complied to be hired by Ling Han, he also received pay, so he obviously had to find another way to solve the issue on cultivation. Ling Han cracked a smile, and said, "Be my attendant for a year." Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 199, Subduing Xuanhuan. Xuanhuan immediately snorted, and said, "A tiny element gathering tier martial artist like you has the impudence to ask me to be your attendant." He was a cultivator at the formidable spiritual ocean tier, and what sort of concept is that? Right above spiritual ocean tier was spiritual pedestal tier, which was the strongest tier in the 8 large noble families and royal family. In other words, in Rain Country, there were only several hundred of those that could firmly suppress Xuanhuan. Rain Country's population was around 100 million, ranking in the top 100 out of 100 million. That was really kick-ass, wasn't it? Change the condition, he said. Then be my bodyguard for a year. Ling Han readily offered another condition. What difference was there? Xuanhuan opened his eyes wide. He had the urge to smack someone, but as he thought that Ling Han still had large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll's secrets, he had to restrain his temper. Change to another one. Say, old brother Guang, you're too picky. A no on the left and a no on the right. Just forget it, I'm too lazy to spend my thoughts on this. Ling Han shrugged, and was about to take Xuanhuan's hand to leave. After he walked 2 steps, he turned his head to say to Xuanhuan. Old brother Guang, what are you suggesting by grabbing onto my clothes? Was this lord pulling on you, which I did you see that with? Xuanhuan lied brazenly. Ling Han laughed aloud, and said, Old brother Guang, if I don't help you with your cultivation technique, you won't let me go. If you want to leave, just leave. This lord isn't a robber. How could I force you to stay here? Xuanhuan spoke frankly and righteously, but his hand was clutching onto the corner of Ling Han's clothes, unwilling to let go. Ling Han laughed mischievously, and said, Old brother Guang, just 1 year as a bodyguard, but in exchange there's hope for you to enter the spiritual pedestal tier. Do you think you'd lose out on this deal? Xuanhuan frowned. Can you really promise that I'll break through to spiritual pedestal tier? Unknowingly, he chose to believe this youngster's facile remark. So what if he resolves the hidden injuries? Breaking through to spiritual pedestal tier was still incomparably difficult. There were only so many spiritual pedestal tier cultivators in Rain Country, all of whom belonged to the imperial family and 8 great clans, with the rare exception of other powerful parties, such as Heaven's Medicine Pavilion and Huyang Academy. It was unheard of for a lone cultivator to earn such an achievement. 3 Yang breaks heaven, Origin's lock is laid, Ling Han suddenly quoted. Xuanhuan's complexion instantly changed, and he said, How do you know large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll's verbal chant? How strange. If I didn't know, then how would I fix your problem? Ling Han smiled faintly. Xuanhuan sighed, and said, You win. This boy kept his calm, appearing to have a sure hold of him. Old brother Guang, don't be disappointed. You'll understand later that this is the best choice you've made in your entire life. Ling Han laughed. Xuanhuan shook his head, and said in helplessness, Boy, you don't look like a master who settles in his place. This lord acting as your bodyguard will most definitely encounter some danger, maybe even handing over my life. Don't worry, at most a little danger, death is impossible. Ling Han patted his shoulder. Whatever, now that this lord has already decided to ride on your pirate ship, there's no need to think more of it. Xuanhuan was one who unexpectedly met gains and losses with equanimity, no longer fussing over being Ling Han's bodyguard for a year. Ling Han said, 3 Yang breaks heaven, Origin's lock is layered. This verbal chant is the problem when you cultivate. I met a person who was just like you, understanding those words as sealing origin power within the 3rd backbone. This certainly can increase explosiveness, but with time, it will cause immense damage. If you continue to cultivate this way, in no less than 3 years, your backbone will collapse, and you'll become a cripple. Xuanhuan couldn't help but be moved. For a formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator, once their cultivation progress was lost, it was no different from dying. Moreover, with his recalcitrant personality, he often offended many people, and once he lost his cultivation, many people would definitely beat him when he was down. The terrible result of that need not be said. May I ask young Master Han how this verbal chant should be interpreted? He lowered his posture to seek guidance from Ling Han. Ling Han smiled slightly, speaking of which, it really was coincidental. In his previous life, he met someone who cultivated the large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll and also derailed on that phrase of the verbal formula. Moreover, the situation back then was much worse as the man's backbone was completely shattered. He was entrusted to refine a heaven-grade pill that restored bones. Under careful consideration, he also took time to understand large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll to be absolutely safe, and that was how he was able to see through Xuanhuan's problem with a glance. Then let us talk it over, Ling Han said. After a few minutes, Xuanhuan revealed a faithful look. With each expression he became more solemn and respectful. In his mind, Ling Han's status rose infinitely. To know large Sun Heaven Heart Scroll was already impressive, but he obtained the incomplete scroll in an ancient tomb. Knowing the technique was one thing, one only needed a superb memory to remember it. However, Ling Han surpassed the level of learning by rote, being even more knowledgeable about it than he was. It made him feel sudden enlightenment at times, with some parts that he normally didn't understand instantly becoming clear. No wonder Ling Han said that he had a chance to advance into spiritual pedestal tier. Ling Han's understanding was like that of a martial artist master, which made him feel extremely small. Ling Han took a glance at him, and revealed a smile. Subduing Xuanhuan was only on a whim, as he considered Feng Yan's threat and how Wu Songlin and Fu Yuansheng couldn't wander behind his butt all day. However, at most in 1 year, he would definitely reach spiritual ocean tier and Xuanhuan would naturally be unable to help him. So, he set the period of a year. As for whether Xuanhuan wanted to leave or not, then that'd be based on whether or not he had the heart to take him under his wing. Xuanhuan had to make arrangements, so he promised to go find Ling Han 3 days later at Huyang Academy. A formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator has so easily fallen under your control. Lu Yutong still somewhat couldn't believe it. A mere spiritual ocean tier. Ling Han sighed. Put in his previous life, he wouldn't even want a spiritual ocean tier to watch his door, but he was too weak right now, so he'd have to make do with spiritual ocean tier. Lu Yutong rolled her eyes. If a formidable spiritual ocean tier cultivator entered Lu family, it'd be guaranteed that Lu family's top brass would welcome him and shower with heavy promises. Will you die if you don't show off? I'll be Ling Han's bodyguard too. Hu Niu said, unwilling to be outdone. Ling Han laughed aloud, and said, good, from now on, I'll rely on Hu Niu for protection. Hu Niu instantly cracked a smile, appearing to be very happy. After the three returned to the academy, Lu Yutong returned to her quarters, and Ling Han held Hu Niu's hand and returned to their courtyard. From afar, he saw a girl guarding the door, glancing around with an expression full of angst. It was Xuanhuan. What? Is Madame Yan inviting me for a meal? Ling Han smiled as he said. Please, young Master Han, save me. Xuanhuan kneeled abruptly onto the ground. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao. Chapter 200, Lady Yan's Plans. What's the matter? Ling Han asked. Xuanhuan only continued to weep. Thankfully, this place was quite remote. Otherwise, anyone would have thought Ling Han was bullying her. If you don't tell me, how am I supposed to help you? Fine. Finish crying, then tell me. Ling Han opened the door and went back in. Right when he was about to close the door, Xuanhuan squeezed in and grabbed onto the corner of his shirt with a delicate hand. I say, why do all of you like to grab onto the corner of my shirt? It's understandable if it was new, but men do this, and women do this too. I am really troubled by this, Ling Han said, shaking his head. Hu Niu gave a strong nod, and made her opinion clear. Ling Han is news. Milady, it was obvious Xuanhuan was not in the mood for jokes. She had just opened her mouth to explain when she started to cry again. Ling Han sighed, and said, in 3 breaths' time, if you still persist in sniveling, I'll throw you out. So mean. Lu Ru'er walked out of the house, and glared harshly at Ling Han. It seems that it would not be enough to just simply throw one out. Ling Han shuffled his sleeves. Ha ha, damn scoundrel, let me tell you. I have already recovered about 70% of my cultivation, and no longer need to fear your threats. Lu Ru'er said proudly. Then why aren't the two of you quickly getting lost? Everything you eat and use every day is mine, don't you know all that needs money? Ling Han said in irritation. Lu Ru'er instantly exploded in anger. She felt that this guy did not have the slightest inclination to feel tender and protective towards women. It was obvious that she and her sister were rare beauties, but this guy did not bear any ideas or intentions towards them at all. What a weirdo. Could it be that he preferred men? That was possible. Otherwise, how could he simply ignore the charm of her sister and her? When she thought about this, she could not help but feel a shiver all over her body. But after being interrupted by the banter between the two of them, Xuanhuan finally regained her composure, and said, "Please take me in, young Master Han. Xuanhuan has no other place to go." Ling Han was startled, and said, "Aren't you of the Cherishing Flower Pavilion? But you actually came here to beg me for shelter. What kind of logic is that? Do you all think that my place is a garbage collection ground? 1, 2, and now 3, and who knows if there will be even more in the future." Lu Ru'er was instantly furious, and said, "Who are you calling garbage?" "Young Master Han, milady is too cruel." Xuanhuan once again began to weep. All right. Just calm yourself and speak slowly. Start from the beginning. Don't keep speaking in one breath and crying in the next. Otherwise, I really wouldn't be able to stand it, Ling Han said. Come, sit down first. Lu Ru'er rolled her eyes at Ling Han, and helped Xuanhuan into the house. After helping her to sit down, she even fetched a cup of hot tea to calm Xuanhuan down. Ling Han looked at Hu Niu, and Hu Niu looked back at him. The two simultaneously shrugged. They were the real owners, but why was it they seemed more like outsiders here? Xuanhuan held onto the cup of tea and rested for a while before finally opening her mouth and telling her story. Yan Tianzhao managing to awake was supposed to be a good thing, but for Xuanhuan, it was the beginning of her nightmare. She had coincidentally eavesdropped on a conversation between Lady Yan and Yan Tianzhao. It seemed that it was not because Lady Yan wanted a place to invest her energy and hopes into that she had been adopted. Instead, there had been a different motive for her adoption right from the beginning. She was a furnace. Lady Yan most likely knew that her son would not be able to awaken for quite some time, but there was only so much optimal time for cultivation for a martial artist, so how could she allow her son to lag behind at the starting line? It just so happened that she had obtained an unusual cultivation technique that was divided into two, main and subsidiary, techniques. The subsidiary technique was to be cultivated by one person, while the main technique was to be cultivated by another. When the time came, as long as the two people cultivated together, then the person who had cultivated the main technique would be able to easily swallow the person who had cultivated the subsidiary technique, her cultivation and even vitality. And the cultivation technique that she had practiced since her childhood was precisely the subsidiary technique, in order for her to pave the way for Yan Tianzhao. The reason why they had not taken action immediately was because Yan Tianzhao had only just awakened, and had just begun to cultivate the main technique. As long as he was slightly accomplished in his cultivation, they would take action, and by that time, not only would Xuanhuan lose all her cultivation, she would also lose her vitality. She would, in an extremely short period of time, become an old woman. If milady had treated me sincerely, I am willing to die for milady, no questions asked. But I can't accept this. Xuanhuan had cried so much, her eyes were red. She's so evil, too evil. Lu Ru'er wiped her tears as well where she was standing. She was so easily moved to tears that Ling Han mocked her inside his head. Hey, you're an assassin. Okay. Don't be so emotional, all right? Ling Han pondered for a moment, then said, Lady Yan has been active for so many years, and must have a very wide system of connections and a similarly wide information network in the Imperial City. The fact that you're staying here would not be able to stay hidden for very long. At that time, when Lady Yan comes to seek you out, would you be able to resist? If she decided that she wanted to take her adopted daughter with her, that would be a right and proper thing. Even the laws of the Empire would side with Lady Yan. If Ling Han attempted to stop her, then it would be he who had kidnapped her daughter. Ling Han had his backers, but so did Lady Yan, and her backer was also very powerful. Xuanhuan could not help but pale, and began to shudder. She would rather die than be taken back by Lady Yan. That's right. Those two girls should have mostly recovered from their injuries. Why don't you go with them and leave Rain Country? Ling Han suggested to Xuanhuan. That would be great. He'd be able to solve 3 huge problems in one go. Who told you we were leaving Rain Country? Lu Ru'er leaped up. I am definitely going to kill that traitor. I think you're more likely to die than kill anyone. Ling Han pointed out, dampening her enthusiasm, and continued, it would be better if the 2 of you return and work hard on your cultivation. Zhu Keixin has been deceived once, so she would definitely not fall into the trap a second time. The 2 of you no longer have the chance to set up a trap to ambush her. Lu Ru'er pouted. She wanted to argue, but knew that Ling Han was telling the truth. The power gap between the 2 of them and Zhu Keixin was too large, and they had also lost the advantage of taking the initiative. Thus, it was practically impossible for them to once again attempt to assassinate Zhu Keixin. Mr. Ling is right. Lu Feng'er walked out as well, and said, when we finally recover from our injuries, we will immediately leave Rain Country. We are extremely grateful for how you have taken care of us for this period of time, and hope that there will be a chance for us 2 sisters to repay your kindness, Mr. Ling. Ha! It would be the best repayment for me if you leave, Ling Han said bluntly. Who knew nodded seriously as well. This detestable guy. Lu Ru'er humphed, and said, scoundrel, if you come to Fire Country in the future and get into trouble, remember to look for us. We will definitely take very good care of you. She emphasized the words, very good, heavily. Obviously, she held a big grudge towards him. All right. You can stay with the 2 sisters for tonight, and leave after a few days, Ling Han said to Xuanhuan, pretending he had not heard anything. Thank you, young Master Han. Thank you, Mrs. Xuanhuan lowered into a bow. Peng, peng, peng. It was at this moment that there came a knock on the door, causing the 4 of them to be startled at the same time. Mr. Ling, are you there? A soft, sweet voice was heard from outside, yet it was this voice that caused Xuanhuan to shiver uncontrollably. Her face had paled completely from terror. Lady Yan, the Lu sisters mouthed. Ling Han nodded. Kill her. Instantly, Lu Ru'er was boiling with killing intent. End of the chapter. Alchemy Emperor of the Divine Tao will be read in 5 chapters for every Monday, Wednesday, Friday and Sunday. Please leave this sound novel and press subscribe, follow, and the bell so you don't miss any new clips as well. See you.